Okay. Awesome. Thank you for the invite. I'll try to keep it short because, I know we are going over time as well. So really, I wanted to spend the time on applying trustworthy AI in banking across the life cycle. And I feel like, there are multiple sessions which go deep dive into specific models and performance and, other areas of, I think, explainability and observability. But this is more from the context of how do you look at end to end. So let me just spend a few minutes on this and would love any questions at the end. By the way, I'm Prem Prakash. I head product marketing for the AI business and a few other things at Databricks. And as you might have heard of Databricks, it's a pioneer in the Lakehouse platform, which on top of which you can build everything from structured to unstructured database to use cases from data warehousing all the way to AI. So we can talk about that also briefly if we have time. I think the core is that AI adoption is accelerating, but challenges remain, especially when we think about banking and the adoption within the banking space. And I think the key challenges really are around, I think we talked about that just a bit, I think, in the previous session around, will the model generate fair, accurate outcomes? And I think, as we think about the diversity of people that any bank or any financial institution is delivering to, right? You have to think hard about making sure that there is fair outcomes, accurate outcomes for everybody. And that takes me to the second point, which is, of course, no model will be 100% accurate all the time. It's doing prediction. Things can change, right? We saw that with the whole pandemic, like, things may shift gears due to many other things which have not been considered as these models were built. So as part of that, then, you should be able to establish lineage and really think about how really, if an outcome comes and say it's a false positive, you should be able to explain back why that happened. I think that goes a bit into explainability, but also, what we have realized working with many people and customers is like, when you start to establish that lineage, it becomes difficult more and more when you use many different tool sets which are available. But I think you'll need to stitch together. But I think the lineage back to where the data was, the table where the data was, it becomes tricky, and governance start to come into play, policies start to come into play, which makes it very tricky. And then the third one is really around retraining or online updates, which is like, as things change, then on the data side itself, or if drift happens, how do you retrain and make the updates fast enough? Because with the whole, global nature of many banks, you're actually having an impact on hundreds of thousands of customers every minute, every hour. So every moment that's not being used to update these models, once a gap has been identified, it will lead to impact on customer satisfaction. So from there, if we look at just one particular example, I picked up compliance as a use case, and then looking at AML. So AML is extremely manual process even now. Like, AML specialists verify client profiles, they will do all the due diligence versus the sanctions list that the government has, some kind of historical data, etc., and KYC inputs. So it's a lot. There is, like, it is extremely supervised, very manual process. At the same time, frauds are becoming more sophisticated. They're digital, they're global, they're decentralized. For example, there have been so many examples where money laundering can happen around millions of dollars, but they all start with small, chunks of less than $5,000, but they all add up to hundreds of them, and then suddenly it's $500,000, $1 million, so on and so forth. So it has become very decentralized, global, and therefore, for the ML specialists, they have to continue to spend more time doing this instead of getting automation. And I feel like AI can really help deliver automation through a combination of both NLP and image recognition model, for example. So both vision plus language here, when you can look at suspicious activities and patterns in them based on an NLP model. And also, like, where you have got images, you can match location with images in Google Maps and other things. And you can actually automate much of this. The challenge, though, is that when you automate all of this and you start getting results which are false positives and others, right? How do you make sure that you are able to correct them? You are able to have lineage and understand them. And that's where, as we think about, building a trustworthy AI system, you have to consider the full ML lifecycle. And I feel like in most cases, I think there is just so much of silo. People are either thinking about, oh, let me build this model and make it extremely accurate. Awesome. That makes sense. And for that particular model, you're able to trace back the explainability, why the model gave that result, etc. That's great. But that is really around just training, tuning the model, right? And then you have made a very good model. But then, some of the things that people start forgetting is around the data operations. For example, where did that data come from? And as you see changes in the model behavior later on, how you are able to go back and see if that data changed, or do you need to change that data? And if you do need to change that data, how does that then reflect in other places that the same data is being copied and used? Super important. Similarly, around policies and governance, is you need to have certain set of policies governance, especially as you think about regulation in banking. And then model ops, which I think people covered here just in the last section, around monitoring, retraining, those kind of things. But I think the key is to really think about the full ML lifecycle. And I know that, there are areas where you have existing systems, existing processes, but at the same time, I think the real solution really lies in when you have got all of this connected into a data-centric AI approach. Because if you think about the challenges that people talked about or we think about, right, it actually at the core is data, which is around when the model was built, right, or when the model drifts or something, you have to go back eventually at the data. And so super important that if you're training a model, the data that is coming for it, tuning it, when you're auto logging, when you're doing various kinds of feature engineering and creating those formulas, all of those, it's critical to have a core data foundation which is common to all of this. And that data foundation can have common policies, governance, so that even if the data is changing, you are able to look at that and have that lineage, and you're able to go back into that data. So a key investment that that we feel like that needs to be made is really about when you're thinking about building a machine learning solution which can be scaled, which is used in, for example, right now we just talked about the KYC and about AML. And in case of AML, we talked about a language model and a vision model. In many cases, like there's a multiple, many models at work. Like we have seen so many places where customers are using thousands of models. For example, you may have different model in different places for, say, loyalty of customers, right, in different regions, different countries, so on. So there are a ton of machine learning models that you may want to scale with. And the more you think about scaling, the more the challenges of explainability, challenges of retraining fast, challenges of deploying, challenges of lineage start to become more and more, because you will have to automate. You won't have a person who can go and look into it, and data science teams likely will always be smaller compared to all the application development and other teams who are deploying these models. So one of the core areas of thinking that we have is really to think about a data-centric AI approach, and really think hard about how can you start to always think about a core data foundation where everything goes back from policy governance, so that every other step then, which is DevOps, DataOps, and model ops, can actually sync well, and you're able to have that lineage and observability end to end whenever you're running model, even at scale. That's all I had. I'll just pause and look for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Prakash. Yes, AML is probably the most and probably the most important, the most used and the most important within banking as far as application of ML. Lots of work as far as implementation has been done. Everything else is more like experimenting and the research stage, but AML is leading as far as applications. So I'm really glad I could see some, and I could understand more than from the presentation than from reading the papers. So you clarify some of the things for myself as well. So thank you. Thank you. And if there are any questions from the audience, please, by all means, ask.
Sure. I have a question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is not really my field. I'm not too familiar with finance and AI. So I was curious. I guess in your opinion, what do you think are the biggest non-technical obstacles to widespread adoption of AI in this sector, in terms of like operational challenges or public acceptance? What do you think are the biggest hurdles to overcome?
Yeah, I don't think public acceptance is a big hurdle. So let me just put that out of the way right away, right? I think public is using AI every day in various other spaces, right? So you're using it when you're ordering a pizza, you're using it in many, like NLP is all over the place, right? So it's already there. I think you're on video, I'll try to put on the video as well. I think the challenge really mostly is coming from operational and regulatory point of view in finance, which is making sure that, because really it is money on the line, literally, right? And imagine like you are putting in a credit card application and that credit card application gets rejected, or for example, I may get rejected because my name is similar to the name of, say, a terrorist, for example, and that terrorist name is on a sanctions list, right? It is very real that there may be a false positive where my credit card or my home loan gets rejected, which I do not want. So I think, it really goes back to, you want to make sure that every innocent or every real person who deserves that loan or deserves the financial benefit gets that benefit. So a big part is really, I would say, regulation, and connected with that is operations. How do you make sure, like GDPR is such a good example where, all of us, all organizations had to go through changes to make sure that our data is really privacy governed in the right way. So it is in a similar way. And I feel like, there'll be regulations which will continue to come and evolve, and organizations who really want to invest deep in AI ML, they'll have to think hard about how to get ahead of that. And I think data-centric AI platform is an approach that can be taken. There could be other approaches too, but there's one approach. So I think operations and regulation is a big one. And the other one is really ROI. I think many times, ML can be seen as, oh, good to have, but I think the ROI piece is it takes time to just show the ROI, and sometimes it just goes on the back burner. So for a CXO in the organization, they're like, oh, do I really need to invest into this, becomes a question. But I think that will catch up eventually. It's only a matter of time. Manufacturing, like we're seeing every factory almost has AI in it. I think finance and banking will follow, but I think those are the two which come to my mind, but others can chip in too.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Thank you. Maybe we can move to the next presenter. I think we have two presenters left.